Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whether you are listening to the Podium Podcast from. Welcome back to another installment of the podcast, where today it is the 2025 Emilia Romagna Grand Prix review, in which Max Verstappen made it his second win of the 2025 season around the historic Imola circuit in Red Bull's 400th Grand Prix, which turned out to be a very fascinating race. Maybe not in terms of drama and crashes, but more of a strategical, uh, I suppose, strategical importance. It was a race of strategy, and for once we actually had some decent overtaking action around Imola, which of course coming into the weekend was going to be the biggest talking point about I suppose, the future of Imola coming into a circuit where it's difficult to overtake with these big chunky cars. In this new regulation, Imola's future still remains extremely uncertain in Formula One. Of course, the race itself yesterday was actually a fairly interesting one, with of course the different offsets, different tire differences, the almost upside down topsy turvy field we had for a lot of the Grand Prix made some interesting on track action, which hopefully could save Imola's future. But regardless, it was a great race, a race which Verstappen seemed to dominate from the McLarens, which ultimately wasn't McLaren's to lose. I think we'll get into that later on. But of course, as we do on the channel, before we get into the talking points, we're going to have a look back at what step by step happened. And it was at the start, not very Verstappen-esque start initially. It was a very, I suppose, poor getaway for Verstappen on the hard tire. On a medium tire, but starting in second position, Piastri got a better initial getaway. Verstappen was almost under threat from George Russell behind. So coming into a very long, I suppose, straight into the first braking zone at Tamburello, it seemed that Verstappen did not have the getaway he wanted it to be. But out of nowhere, out of thin air, he magically hangs on to the outside of the first, I suppose, part of Tamburello and swoops around to Piastri's surprise to take the lead of the Grand Prix in a very incredible move, to be fair. Further down the field, not much did happen, but regardless, it seemed that Verstappen, by a couple of laps later, got the clean air, which I suppose is extremely important, and it has been a recurring, I suppose, theme of the 2025 season. Got the getaway. He got out of DRS zone to Piastri behind, as he's almost was running away with the race win. Lando Norris by around lap 10 was also trying to make moves on George Russell for the third position, I believe. A little bit of a good battle between the two British drivers. Norris even getting forced onto the grass before the entry of Villeneuve, but by after a couple of attempts, Norris made the move with a nice switchback at Villeneuve to get into third position and to make it a Verstappen, Piastri, Norris top three, which we have seen quite often this season. Regardless, there was still a huge mountain decline for both McLaren drivers. It was around a 7 second gap almost to Verstappen from Piastri, and then Piastri to Norris was almost another 10 second gap by the time they got to almost a quarter of the way through the Grand Prix. Well, this is where it changed, quarter of the way through the Grand Prix, because it seemed that McLaren opted for the two-stop strategy for Piastri, which meant that he had to pit on lap 14 because it just seemed that he couldn't hold on to his tyres as much as he wanted to try and make the one-stop work. This means that he was almost put down into, I believe, P14, P13, which meant at the top it was Verstappen leading Norris with a hefty almost 12-second gap, which Norris was, working at, but it seemed that Verstappen almost had every single pocket covered. It also meant that Piastri was put into a lot of traffic, which made it difficult for him to try and work his way up through the field, and it soon realised that those who decided to do the two-stop, most notably at the front, Antonelli, Russell, Russell and Piastri, it seemed that those who stayed for the one stop actually made the right decision. On lap 29, it seemed that Lando Norris was going to come into the pits to make his one-stop strategy work by shifting to the mediums, from the mediums to the hards. But to his dismay, literally 30 seconds after he exited the pit lane, a stricken Esteban Ocon was slowly idling his way out of turn 8, I believe, which meant a virtual safety car was put in place, which gave Verstappen an almost free pit stop, putting in 20 seconds ahead of, I suppose, Norris, who was second at that time. That meant as the race resumed, it seemed that Verstappen had it all done by midway through the Grand Prix, as it was a top 5 of Verstappen, Norris, Albon, Piastri and Isaac Hadjar, who were all on one stops and they all made it work, except for Piastri, who was still working his way up from the two stop. By this time, it seemed that the race was almost set and done, with Verstappen checking out at the front and Norris being so far ahead of the rest of the cohort, as Piastri made a position up to P3 after overtaking Albon. But by lap 47, it was a safety car, as homegrown talent Antonelli was also out of turn 8, slowing down to cause the full safety car to come out. This is where things get interesting, because Verstappen decided to pit, and so did Lando Norris, which meant that when Verstappen came out, he was back into first, but Lando Norris was then put behind his teammate Oscar Piastri in the pecking order, as Piastri decided to stay out. This means, as the race resumed, after Norris really pleaded to try and ask his strategist to switch positions because he had the fresher tyres to try and attack Verstappen, McLaren said no. So as the race resumed, it was a lot of work for even both of the drivers to try and catch the Dutchman out in front. Regardless, there was a little bit of fighting, a little bit of argy-bargy between the papaya duo, but after a couple of attempts on lap 58, it was Norris that made a move on Piastri at turn 1. But with 5 laps remaining and 5 seconds to try and close in, it seemed Verstappen had it all set and covered as he took the 2025 Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix win. Well, we've got a lot to talk about, and I think the first, I suppose, thing we need to talk about, as you can probably see by the title, is what did McLaren do to not win? How did McLaren blunder this race win? By realistically getting caught out between each other. That is what I'm going to say, because if we take, for example, I think there's many ways he could have blundered, but let's take the first mistake of the Sunday for McLaren. It was putting Piastri on a 2-stop. It was never going to work around Imola. Yes, overtaking was a little bit better this weekend, but you've seen in past years, it's still extremely difficult to overtake. Imola is an old, fast circuit, which means that it's almost always moving. There's no proper braking zone for the drivers to really deal with, which is great in qualifying, but in the Grand Prix, it does prove a little bit more difficult to overtake. So putting your driver on a 2-stop strategy whilst everyone else is seeming to go on a 1-stop really makes you think about what McLaren were trying to achieve with that. It was still a very good effort from Piastri to recover to P3. Regardless, it was a race win squandered. I think Piastri, to be fair, altogether didn't have a great weekend, with turn 1 on the first lap being a great example. But if he was on the 1-stop, I do think that he had any much of a chance to win, as I think his teammate did. But something that McLaren will be thinking about for sure. You also have personally pitting Lando in the proper safety car was also for me a blunder. Reason being, do the opposite of what the person you're trying to overtake does. We saw how difficult McLaren just saw how difficult it was, even with a big tyre offset. It was how difficult it was to overtake drivers, which was seen through Piastri. But they decided to pit Lando, which meant they had so much work to do from 3rd position to try and take the race win. For me, do the opposite of what Verstappen did. It's quite simple. That's just the basics of racing. With only a handful of laps to go, I think they should have taken the chance with track position than fresher tyres, because fresher tyres are always going to be on even footing. But with an offset, with Lando on maybe a little bit more older tyres and Verstappen on fresh tyres, track position is also very vital. You also talk about switching places, which I've seen a lot of people on social media comment on. Places. Lando's got a fresher tires. He's got a better chance of winning. He should deserve to be in second position to try and attack Max. And for me, I would say fully 100% yes. McLaren ultimately do not come to Imola for a 2-3. They come here to win. And if that's a 1-3, then so be it. But they've won. They've also taken points out of Verstappen, which some people might say is a championship rival. Some people might say it's not a championship rival. Regardless, it is. It is what it is. Verstappen will always still be in the mix for the championship. So why not try and take the win from your championship rival? You got the constructors in the bag already. So for me, I would have said with 10 laps to go, Lando does have. He's got about 5 or 6 laps to try and attack Max. If he fails to do so, then reinstate the positions. That would have been fair. I think that would have been equal game for everyone. However, I do understand how there are some people that are saying that Piastri wholeheartedly deserved to be in second position because he was there, and that's just the way the racing is. But McLaren will be, I think, kicking themselves from Sunday and thinking that they could have taken a race win. I would also say that in regards to Piastri having a poor performance, is you also have to look at the likes of Turn 1 as a great example. I don't know if it was more on Verstappen being just absolutely brilliant or Piastri having a little bit of an off moment, but regardless, you always have to make sure with Verstappen that the door is firmly shut. And it almost seemed, I'm looking back at the footage, and it almost seems that Piastri breaks almost too early for the first corner to really, I suppose, do any sort of thing. It was almost like a half-committed positioning of his car. You either go really late on the inside, or you go and close the door on the outside. Anyway, you have to block off Verstappen, and he left the door open. And it might have been a just that he almost didn't expect Verstappen to come storming around the outside, but it is Max Verstappen. You have to make sure that the door is closed with him. But regardless, it was an unbelievable move by Verstappen. The strategic, I suppose, intelligence that man has, the racecraft he has to block Russell off, the charging Russell as well, who looked almost the quickest out of the top three, to then block him off, move to the outside of the track, look at where Piastri is, but think, there's a space here, I'm going to go for it, catch him off guard, brake so late without locking up, perfectly align your car with the second corner curve, if you know what I mean, and take the lead. It was just absolute brilliance, and that is why he is a 4-time world champion, and that is ultimately why he won the Grand Prix. I think dirty air is so, I suppose, important that if anyone's in first out of Verstappen and McLaren's, they can easily set sail, check out, and win the Grand Prix, which is something you don't really want. Qualifying, I was also say was very interesting. I think that was probably one of the best qualifying sessions I've genuinely watched in a while. Of course, you had Tsunoda having a huge shunt, but also at the top, you had people like Carlos Sainz setting the fastest lap in Q2. You had both Ferraris eliminated, which was a surprise, and also the tyre, I suppose, drama, which we'll get onto next time. But the tyre drama with the mediums with Aston Martin actually proving quicker in some instances than Ferrari on a soft. It shows that, you know, with Pirelli, which we'll get onto now, actually, might as well talk about it. But with Pirelli now putting out the C6, it does really beg the question: is that does Formula One need softer compounds to run during a Grand Prix? And to that, I think this year's Emilia Romagna Grand Prix is a perfect, I suppose, example to show that softer compounds does make better racing. It switches things up in qualifying. It proves that a race can also just not be a boring one stop. So I mean, with, you know, there's so many different tyre offsets, it gives very Bahrain Grand Prix vibes, with Bahrain also having a softer compound than normal. There's so much different strategical differences, which makes racing a lot more interesting, a lot more of a upside down field, a lot more tyre offsets, a lot more overtaking on track, off track action in the pits, puts more emphasis on the teams to do a better stop. I mean, yeah, I don't think there is no other way. You can't think that having softer compounds is not the way to go. Williams also had a very good weekend, which we'll get into later, but Williams were flying out there today. Uh, Very good. A P5 and a P8, I believe, for the team in blue. Very strong. Albon was running in the podium places for almost half of the Grand Prix, which, if you compare that to the last couple of seasons, you would be absolutely laughing your head off. But it shows that James Vowles does have a, I suppose, valuable philosophy in Williams, and it is working. And you only have to look at 2026 and think if they can continue, considering that they weren't even investing a heavy amount into 2024 and 2025. You do think with Albon already scoring 40 points from the first 7 Grand Prix, it is looking hopefully like a very good season for the team, and to outqualify both Ferraris and for Sainz to finish ahead of the Ferrari in Miami and in oh wait, I don't think he finished in Miami, but in Imola is a fairly little bit of a bittersweet moment, definitely for the Spanish driver. Verstappen is also a big talking point. I mean, yes, he was dominant. He was absolutely exceptional this weekend. One of a performance to really reinstate his name back into the championship fight. But also, he had an incredible amount of luck, which we can say for anyone. It's just the luck of the draw. That's just racing. But to be gifted with a VSC after Lando pitted, and also to be gifted a safety car and have such a huge, monumentous gap that even if you did pit, you'll still come out in the front. Just goes to show how very fortunate it seems compared to maybe his luck in Miami last time out. This was a lot more of a straightforward weekend for Verstappen, but regardless, still, even after the safety car restart, he pulled a 6-7 second gap in within less than 10 laps, which goes to show that he is a man on a mission and, of course, not to be reckoned with. Let's go to predictions now. Let me just turn the pages. But predictions. Who did I say was going to be on pole? Max Verstappen. No, I did not say. I did not predict that to correct. Lando Norris to be second. Nope. Piastri to be third. No. And Anthony and Leclerc to be fourth and fifth. No, they did not even get into Q3. Race-wise, Lando Norris to win. No. Verstappen to come second. Nope. I was so close to switching them to a round when they were thinking about it, when I was doing the video. Piastri to be third. Yes. Russell to be fourth? No, he actually had his worst performance of the season in seventh. Antonelli to be fifth? No, he did DNF. If we go to the middle of the race now, and let me just check what lap 31, and I produce Verstappen to be in front. Yes, that is true. Norris to be second. No, it was Piastri. Piastri to be second. No, it was Norris. Antonelli third. No, I don't think he was even in the race. Hamilton fourth. No, and Leclerc fifth. No, that was actually Isaac Hadjar, which shows how much of a crazy Grand Prix it was. Biggest good surprise, I put Red Bull. I don't think they did. I think I deserve 2 points for that. I will take that for sure. And biggest flop, I did say Colapinto, and I do have to say Colapinto was probably one of the biggest flops of the weekend. A very poor in qualifying crash, obviously in Q1, and also in a Grand Prix. I mean, there was a moment where he went off onto the gravel at Ravazza, I believe. So it sums up maybe a little bit of a poor start to his 2025 season. So I will give myself 2 marks for them. No safety cars as well, I put down, which was not true, which could have been true, but it was not. So that is a big X. So out of the 21 I can get, I did get a whopping 6, and I think that's probably my best score so far. So we are working our way upwards in life. Let's turn to, sorry, let me just turn in my notebook. Let's go to, obviously, the constructors and drivers standings, and of course, at the top, it is getting ever more, I suppose, interesting. You have at the top, of course, Oscar Piastri is still leading the championship with 146 points from Lando Norris in second with 133 points. So a 13-point gap. He's taking 3 points out of his lead, but only 9 points behind is Max Verstappen, who, of course, winning the Grand Prix, has made it that there is only a 22-point margin between the top three, which is absolutely great after, 7 races. You also have, most notably, Alex Albon in 8th with 40 points now, which puts him only 8 behind Antonelli and a whopping, 26 ahead of Esteban Ocon in 9th position. So he's almost in no man's land in that part of the championship. If you look at also who is pointless still, Fernando Alonso still continues his pointless streak. That is 7 from 7 without a point. He could have scored a point today, and I think Aston Martin had a great chance to qualify in P5 and P7 or 8. Alonso in P5, but still he finished outside the points again. Lawson, Jack Doohan, Gabriel Bortoleto, and Franco Colapinto also join him on 0 points. If we look to the constructors now, McLaren are running away with this constructors championship. To Mercedes, it is 279 to 147. But Red Bull have caught up Mercedes in that fight for second with a 16-point difference, with Ferrari on 114 and Williams on 51. And the gap between Alpine and Sauber in 9th and 10th, and also Racing Bulls, is 4 points with 10 for Racing Bulls, 7 for Alpine, and 6 for Sauber. Let's go to my drivers of the week, teams of the week, winners of the week, whatever you want to call it. And I think the first one has to be the Dutchman Max Verstappen. Flawless, yes, didn't get pole by 0.023 seconds, but still managed to dominate a race which was, I suppose, not on his bingo card to win. Turn 1 was probably the example, the place where he won the Grand Prix. An exceptional move, probably the best move I've seen on an opening lap, and he made both McLarens look a little bit silly on Sunday. Williams also has to be out there for biggest winner. A double point scored finish, P5, P8, a Williams driver running in the podium places for half the Grand Prix is also exceptional and something you wouldn't wouldn't dare to think about in 2025. It was a shame with Carlos Sainz not trying to catch up the Ferraris at the end, but still a very good weekend. A P5 and P8, they could be very happy. And I think Isaac Hadjar is also a great shout for drivers of the week, because he is the second highest scoring Red Bull family driver, if you know what I mean. Tsunoda finished P10, Hadjar finished P9, Lawson finished P13, and Verstappen finished P1. So he was second best this weekend, and he's really putting his name forward for that second Red Bull seat, which personally I do not think he should be going for. But regardless, it was a great result. 2 points on the board, and he could be very pleased with that. Flops of the week now, and I believe my first one has to go to Aston Martin, due to the fact that they had an exceptional qualifying. They pulled an absolute blinder in terms of strategy in qualifying by going up for the mediums, but came race pace, the 2 stops just did not work for them. Got stuck in traffic and could not make a move after the safety car. Alonso was even venting his frustration on the radio to really sum up a poor weekend for both drivers. Haas also a little bit of a poor weekend, a DNF and a P18 finish, I believe, which is very, very poor compared to the start that they did have to the season. Very poor, and it is 2 mechanical faults in a row at Haas. Franco Colapinto also has to be noted for a little bit of a poor weekend, a little bit of a flop of the week, because a poor qualifying, under a lot of, I suppose, scrutiny already coming into this weekend after Jack Doohan was dropped after 5 Grand Prix. Very poor. Didn't manage to do anything in qualifying because he crashed, and then come race just sat a little bit, almost gormless. Couldn't really make a move on anyone, and to be fair, didn't really make an impact, which I think he wanted to. And I think that is a great place to wrap up the 2025 Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix review. Make sure to like and subscribe and have a simply lovely day. Goodbye.